I was born on a farm in Arizona in 1918, and back then everybody was poor and the schools didn't give you anything. You had to earn your money to buy whatever school supplies you needed. And of course we didn't have any money, so I had to pick cotton, and then that didn't make enough money, so my father had a peanut patch, and I used to sit out on the corner of our street and sell peanuts to passersby so that I had some money. And then I just learned to do what I needed to do to keep going and hang in there. And then I was still in school there in Chandler when Herbert Hoover was running for president, and so I got chosen to hand out handouts for him, and so I did everything in the world trying to get him, and then of course Roosevelt beat him, but he was a good man and he was a fun guy, and
you got to meet him at San Marcos?
He came to the San Marcos Hotel, which was in Chandler, where all the wealthy people came, and came over and came to our church. So I really got to shake his hand and hold him, and that was a wonderful experience for a poor little girl.
You went to Chandler High School and you were a cheerleader.
Well, I was, one of the first female ones, because it was all boys, and the megaphones were so big I couldn't even hold them.
But tell about when you went to Arizona State Teachers College, because you had been a high school cheerleader, you wanted to try out.
I know, I did. I saw a sign on campus at Arizona State when I was there, and I'd been a cheerleader in high school, so I went. And this guy met me and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I came to try out." And he said, "Well, we don't have girls." And I said, "How come?" Well, he didn't know how come, and he picked me. And I thought it was because I was so good, but it turns out my sister had just graduated from Arizona State, and he was crazy about her, and he thought it'd make points with her if he picked me. And then in our yearbook, it said I was the first female cheerleader in the United States, but my daughter tells me there was one way back when somewhere else. But I must have been next. I was teaching school up in Thatcher, Arizona, when Pearl Harbor hit, and all the guys I knew in the Army said, "Don't join the WWII," and all of them I knew in the Navy, "Don't join the waves." So I had to heck with you and joined the Red Cross. And so when I was training for the Red Cross, why, it was at a place called Arlington Farms in Arlington, Virginia. Then I went to war. I served a year of the war and a year of the occupation of Germany.
Yeah. When you got to England, you were at the B-24 base where Jimmy Stewart, the actor and military officer, was wing commander at the base. Can you tell the story of the guys to the dance, and
the guys used to have to get their flying time in, so I'd fly to dances with them all across England. We'd go to dances and then come home. Well, this one time I flew with this guy in a one-seater plane, and so when we went to the dance and had a good time for the weekend, and we were taken off to come home, and the commander of that base knew it was a one-seater plane and two people, so he said we couldn't take off. So I told the guy, "Let me get on the train, I'll go home." And he said, "No, I brought you, I'm gonna take you home." So we took off anyway, and of course the commander of that base got in touch with our commander back home, and the MPs were waiting for us when we got there. So I slid down in the pit and stayed there, and he got up and the MPs took him. And so I thought I was sneaking off and getting home quietly, but the GIs that were just watching the airport saw me and picked me up and brought me home. And I said to him, please don't tell anybody. I said, I don't want you to lie, but unless they ask, don't volunteer. So they were real good, but they teased me for about a week. And then
Jimmy Stewart did call you in.
Yeah, and then the word got out that I was there, and Jimmy Stewart was our wing commander, and he called me in and he said, did you come back with him? And I said, do I have to answer that? And he said, well, why not? I said, well, the Red Cross said if we didn't get along with the military, they'd send us home. And he said, do you want to go home? And I said, no. And he said, well, I guess you don't have to answer then, though he knew the answer very well. And so he got reduced from a major to a captain for about 3 months, and then they put him back up, and that's all that happened with it.
So eventually you got to go to continental Europe, where you were going to help run the clubs.
They were sending us, they had all they needed in England. They were sending us across to, I was going to Paris, and then up to Germany. And so we were supposed to cross, and when they had room, they put us on these boats. And so I was on a boat, and we were going up to Cherbourg. That's where we were supposed to land, and it turns out that the ship that was leading, he'd never been in the port before, and the one I was on, the captain had been there a lot of times, so they were changing positions, so he would lead the boats in, and then I was so seasick, and the
chaplain
came and he said, don't be afraid, you're going to be all right. I said, look, I'm not afraid, I'm sick. And so it took me a long time, because I got seasick at just seeing the plane. The boat, I didn't even have to get on it. But at any rate, so when we got in there, everybody was waiting for us, and we helped the GIs on their way, and I was in Paris, and that's when I met my brother Pete, because he came up with Italy. General Patton from North Africa to Italy, and we met in the Red Cross Club in Paris, and I've got pictures of us there, and it was real nice, because of course he had to go on and fight, and I went on and ended up right on the border of Belgium and Germany
during the battle
of the Bulge. And I was right there. Dinant was just across the river, the Meuse River, and then the Rhine River was up there. And so I have pictures of me on the Remagen Bridge that Hitler had told this German general to blow it up, but they knew they'd already lost the war, so they didn't want to make more people get killed, because they knew the Americans would come on and take them all prisoner, and this way they wouldn't have to fight. And so they didn't blow it up. And then when I got back to Paris, I found out that Hitler had told the same thing, told him to blow up the Eiffel Tower and the Arc de Triomphe, and that general wouldn't do it. And so they were all still there, and I think those German generals should be recognized some way for saving people's lives, but nobody ever knew who they were.
Once before the Battle of the Bulge, you had a serviceman coming, just one of the GIs, saying that he was afraid. How did you do your counseling?
Well, he came in and he was crying because he was going up the front lines the next day, and he said he was so ashamed because he was afraid. I said to him, good land, you'd have to be an idiot not to be afraid. Of course you're afraid. Nothing wrong with being afraid. And I made him feel a lot better, and off he went. And Of course, I never saw him again, so I don't know whether he made it or not. But when we followed behind, I mean, the GIs were all over the place, dead, and so of course there were more Germans than ours, so we still won in spite of the number of.
You got to meet more than one famous general. I know once at the club you said you danced with General Patton. Can you tell us about that?
Well, General Patton was our commanding officer, and I was dancing with him one night, and he stopped in the middle of the dance floor and pulled out a cigar and lit it and turned to me and he says, "Now, GD, you don't smoke," and walked off and left me on the dance floor. Well, here came his aides to rescue me, and I said to them, "Well, he wasted his energy on me. I don't smoke anyway." But that's the way he was. And then, but his wife came over to Germany, and she lived with us, so I got to know her, and she told me that all through the Battle of North Africa and Italy, he wrote her every single day. He just adored her and she adored him, and it was a whole nother side to Patton that people didn't know about. John Eisenhower was in our outfit, and so I dated him a few times, and once
General Giroux introduced you to General Eisenhower.
Oh yeah, our general took me to the airport with him to meet when Eisenhower came to our headquarters. And of course the first thing Eisenhower wanted to do is buy me a drink. And I'll never forget, General Giroux put his arms over my shoulder and with real pride in his voice said, "Our Red Cross girl doesn't drink." And Eisenhower looked, you know, like, "Where did you find that freak?" But he was very much of a gentleman and said, "Why is it all the pretty Red Cross girls are stationed everywhere except in my headquarters?" But I got to know them, and it was interesting how they learned to work together, and so here we were. I got to meet all these big guys, and it didn't mean a thing to me at the time until I got home and found out how important they were.
Once you did an inspection, it's something we associate with traditional Red Cross work.
No, this was the concentration camp, the prison camp for the Jews, and they needed a woman to do the women's quarters, so they made me do it, and I went, and oh my gosh, meeting those poor ladies that had been prisoners for so long. And then that now they were going to be free. It was a whole different world. And so that was my job, was for about 3 days we went to all of these camps, and so that they knew that I was the official to tell the military that everything was going all right with them, so they wouldn't get, you know, big stories later.
Mm-hmm. And then during the occupation, you were assigned to a study group, and what did the study group do?
Well, they were studying what they did wrong in the war and what they did right and what worked and what didn't work and all those things. And that's what we were doing. It was a study group, and so but our job was still the same, as we're just helping the GIs. And you know, when I don't smoke, but I always got my PX ration cigarettes, so that, because the GIs, if they got lost from their outfit, they didn't have a PX card that worked, so they couldn't get anything. And so I got everything that I was allowed to get. And then when the GIs came through and needed them, I had some to give to them because I didn't need it myself.
Also met some German civilians who were in, I guess, dire straits after the war. They'd suffered privations. Tell us about the dog that came into
the one that did the donuts?
Yes.
Well, you know, they'd send their dogs out to pick up anything they could find to bring it home because they didn't have enough food no matter what. And so we feed the dog, and then we noticed if we gave it a little piece of a donut, it ate it. But if we gave it a whole one, it just disappeared. And so we sent one of the GIs to follow him and see where he went, and he took the donut home. So then we knew that family really needed help. So that was a family we knew how to take care of. But the little German kids would come and beg, and we'd give them anything we had. But then I talked the Air Force into dropping C rations and K rations, and then they dropped candy. And you ought to see them when those planes came over. Those little German kids would stand out there, and they'd practically get hit by the plane or all the stuff. But boy, they just loved that. And the German people saw our Red Cross, and to that meant it was a hospital to them. And so we finally then got the military to assign a medical person to so that they could really take care of them. We did the best we could, but we weren't trained, and so they sent a military person to stay there, because when those German kids came, because they were always getting hurt or never got any help from the bombing. Mm-hmm. So we saw a lot of that too.
When you came home to the States, as you were still in the Red Cross, you were a gray lady for a little while?
No, when I went back east, I joined the Gray Ladies at Walter Reed Army Hospital. Uh-huh. And did gray lady work once a week out there, and they assigned me to the amputee ward. And it was interesting to watch the guys, because when they tormented each other and called each other names fitting what part had been amputated, and all of that, until they knew they were going home. And then they changed, because it was just so hard for them to know they were going to go home and get pity and sympathy, and that isn't what they wanted. They wanted just to be teased and carried on the way they did to each other there at Walter Reed.
Mm-hmm. So there was a German lady that made you some...
They'd make anything for you, and I didn't need anything, so they made me pajamas out of the camouflage parachute and out of a regular parachute. But see all this nice embroidery and everything on them? And they'd do anything for you. But you know, I liked them too, and it was hard to try to think of them as enemies, because that's what they were supposed to be. And so that isn't the way it ended up at all. So we were all friends.